Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Dark Alpha's Passion by Donna Grant, narrated by Victoria Mcgloven. Chapter 1. Dublin. He was fucked. There was no getting around that. Any way he looked, every idea he had fell apart like mist that vanished with the sun. Ruark paused in his wandering of the streets and watched the bright streaks of red and orange in the sky. It was a beautiful sunrise. Any other day, he might have taken it as a good omen. But he knew truths now that he hadn't known before. Truths that changed everything. The rage inside him threatened to explode. He wanted to hurt something. No, he wanted to tear the limbs from the 6 individuals who had put him in this tenuous position. The 6. There was only one outcome for him. He didn't fear death. He dreaded everything he would leave behind. Ruark leaned a shoulder against a building and dropped his head into his hands. Emotion, viscous and cloying, choked him. He might feel better if he could let out a bellow, slam his fist into a wall or something. But he couldn't. Those who controlled whether his family lived or died watched him. One wrong move, and those he loved could be taken from him. He'd once given up everything for them. How could he let anything happen to his family now? He lifted his head. Dublin never truly slept. No city did. The dawning of a new day sent the seedier individuals to their holes to await the night, while other opportunistic people began filling the streets. Ruark didn't know which he found more abhorrent. Fae milled among the mortals, dark and light alike. Some dark didn't bother hiding their red eyes or their silver-streaked black hair. In this day and age, where humans sported various hair colors and eye shades thanks to contacts, no one paid them any heed, though mortals were unconsciously drawn to the Fae. Ruark rarely walked amid humans without lowering his power so they didn't gather around him. Some Fae got off on having that kind of control over mortals. He never had. He found it a nuisance. It made the humans look weak. No other being reacted to the Fae the way they did. And to most Fae, who were egomaniacs, it gave them a god complex. Ruark didn't hate humans, but he didn't like them either. They were simply a part of Earth, just as the Dragon Kings were. If Ruark had his preference, he'd be back on the Fae realm, not having to deal with mortals or the kings. But he wasn't on the Fae realm. He was on Earth. "In fucking hell," he murmured. As the morning progressed, the tourists began filling the streets. They were oblivious to the threats walking alongside them. His gaze locked on a woman, staring at him. She had her blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail that looked as if she had slept in it. For some unknown reason, mortals thought that was a good look for them. They were wrong. She was a 20-something in jeans, a white t-shirt and white sneakers. It was how she stared at him that got his attention. It didn't take Ruark long to realize that this wasn't just any human. The woman was a druid. But why was she staring at him? Druids were all over the world, but the strongest of them resided on the Isle of Skye. It wasn't an oddity to find a druid walking the streets of Dublin. What bothered him was the way she observed him. He quirked a brow, daring her to come closer. She dropped her gaze, and a heartbeat later turned and walked away. Ruark almost followed her. Almost. In the end, he didn't care that she had been staring. So what if she knew he was Fae? Most druids' magic had been diluted through the generations, which meant many hardly had any left. Every once in a while, one was born with significant power and had no idea what it was or how to use it. However, Ruark had more pressing concerns than the druids. He turned his thoughts from the human and back to the matter at hand. The fuckery he was currently mired in. He sighed loudly. His first thought was to run far and fast, if only that were an option. His life wasn't the one on the line, though. It was his family's. Ruark ran a hand down his face and pushed away from the building to continue walking. He had no destination in mind. It wouldn't matter if he did. The others would find him. They always did. "Fuck," he said as his anxiety rose. He didn't only have the others watching him. Now there were the Reapers. "Fucking Reapers," he said with a shake of his head. He'd believed that Rawdon was his friend. It had been so long since Ruark had found someone he thought he could trust. In the end, he'd discovered that Rawdon had the biggest secret of all. He was a Reaper. It explained so much about his actions on Achill Island. Rawdon had been undercover. He hadn't cared a whit about anyone or anything but his mission. Even if Ruark wanted to turn to Rawdon for help now, he couldn't chance it. Not that the Reapers would help him. Ruark didn't look around to see if anyone followed. He knew he was being trailed, his every action scrutinized. He'd never hated anyone more than he did the 6 who governed the Fey others. They wanted power, and they didn't care who died for them to obtain it. The sounds of the city made Ruark tense. He needed somewhere to sit and think. He needed quiet. He briefly thought about his flat in Dublin but decided against it. There was only one place he wanted to go. Ruark lengthened his strides and crossed the busy street. For the 10 minutes it took him to walk to Trinity College, his thoughts receded. He entered the campus and made his way to the rose garden. The instant his feet hit the grass, he paused and closed his eyes. It had been so very long since he had been here. He wouldn't be here now, except the location had reared from his memories, and he'd been unable to shove it aside. Ruark slowly opened his eyes and looked around at the lush beauty of the gardens. Stately trees, numerous flowers, and, of course, roses everywhere. He scanned the area. It was quiet, the garden seemingly keeping the hum of the city back. A few humans strode about, but no one paid him any heed. He spotted 3 wooden benches in the garden, set in a corner with a black iron fence behind them. Ruark chose the middle one and slowly sank onto it. A cherry blossom tree stood before him, its branches thick with blooms, stretching out as if to touch him. He took a deep breath, letting the scents of the garden try to cleanse him, and then slowly released it. He hadn't had time to think about the full impact of what he found himself involved in. However, his thoughts didn't give him a choice now. Flashes of the 6 as they surrounded him, the fear and fury he'd felt as the realization of his predicament sank in, and the sight of Rawdon with the Reapers kept going through his mind. If he called for Rawdon, would he come? Ruark didn't dare try. The 6 had known what they were doing when they brought him to their compound. The Reapers had seen him there. They wouldn't trust him. He wouldn't, in their shoes. But that only made his situation more difficult. It was in his nature to find a way out of any problem. He was a problem solver. It was why everyone in his family turned to him. For a long time, he'd believed that he could handle things on his own. Now he realized how foolish he'd been. Even before the six, he was the only one who'd had anything to lose in his family. He had put everything on the line for them. His family went about their lives as if nothing had changed. All the while, he did everything he could to repay his father's debts and square the favors called in, and continued to make money to support the way of life that everyone in his family was accustomed to. He should have washed his hands of all of them. But that wasn't what a good son did. Never mind that a good father never would have put his family in such a predicament, or placed everything on his son's shoulders. His father had already done his misdeeds, and Ruark had stepped in, as expected, to save the family. It was no use thinking of all of that now. What was done was done. He'd made his choices. There was no going back now. All these centuries he'd thought he'd been doing the right thing, had believed his actions would prove how valuable he was to his family, and that his father might actually be proud of him. Ruark still waited to hear those words. When his father retreated and Ruark took control of things for the family, he had made a promise to himself that he would be fair in his dealings, that no matter the cost, he would pay back all the money and return every favor. Some of those had been out of Ruark's comfort zone, but he'd honored them anyway. With each favor and cent repaid, he'd felt that he was headed in the right direction. He'd done everything right. Or so he'd thought. Ruark had given up the life he wanted, the woman he loved. He'd put aside everything he wished for to take care of his family. It was expected. Expected. His father threw that word around a lot. Ruark had never said that he expected his father to be the man he professed to be. Maybe he should have. None of that mattered now. Not with his current quandary. Ruark had kept his ear to the ground, listening for news of what had occurred on the realm, but he'd never gotten involved. His focus had been on his family and keeping them out of trouble. Like most Fae, he hadn't been aware of the group of beings who called themselves the Others. They consisted of a light and dark Fae, a me and drow druid from Earth, and a me and drow from another realm. Their intention was to kill the Dragon Kings and take the planet for their own, so they could have the magic. Their combined power had done a number on the Dragon Kings, but in the end, the Kings prevailed. Now, the Fae had decided to create their own group of Others. The six who led them were comprised of 3 light and 3 dark. The light and dark detested each other. Their realm had been destroyed because of their civil war, sending them fleeing to Earth. The fact that dark and light were willing to work together was enough to draw Ruark up short. A Fae's magic was considerable. It was more powerful than any druid's magic, even those from the Isle of Skye. To have 6 combine their power should make every soul on the realm quake in their shoes with dread. To make matters worse, the 6 had amassed a group of Fae, brainwashed them to believe everything the 6 said. Then there were the soldiers. Ruark fisted his hands that lay on his thighs. He was strong in his own right, but those bastards had magic that exceeded a normal Fae's. It was how they had taken him from Achill to begin with. Ruark leaned forward and rested his elbows on his knees as he gazed at the grass. A bug crawled over one blade after another, barely making any headway. He stared at the insect as he thought about Achill Island. He may not have liked some of the Fae who had gathered at Moor Hall, but to learn that those not chosen to join the Others had been killed and their magic consumed by the 6 sickened Ruark. The 6 were exceptionally powerful. In the short time he'd been with them, he'd learned there was only one path for him, the one they had chosen for him. Yet, every fibre of his soul screamed against it. He'd fight, if there was a way.
"Hey, Ruark."
He stiffened at the sound of Rawdon's voice. Chapter 2. Siobhan refused to break eye contact with Oscar. For a short time, she'd thought he might be the man she would spend the rest of her life with. But she'd been wrong. Again. How many times would she be wrong? But she knew the answer. She would never be happy with the one she loved. The thought of Ruark made her stomach clench with need and sorrow.
"I thought we were in a good place,"
Oscar said, as confusion lined his face.
"Our two families are well thought of in the Light community. We're a power couple."
She stopped short of rolling her eyes. Oscar thought it was clever to use human sayings. She didn't. While she'd once thought it humorous, it now irritated her to the point of resentment. Everything he did grated on her nerves.
"Siobhan,"
he said, and took a step toward her. She immediately backed away and held up a hand.
"We've said all there is to say." "I disagree. We've spent the past decade together. We've had our ups and downs, but that's any relationship. Why do you want to throw this away? I've bent over backwards for you."
It was on the tip of her tongue to tell him all the things he'd done, or hadn't done, that had led to the demise of their relationship. She wanted to recount every single incident. She had kept a list in her head for a long time now. But it wouldn't be worth the effort. Oscar could be charming when he wanted, and right now he wanted her. The minute she relented, he would return to how he'd acted before. She assumed part of the blame. After all, she had let the relationship go on for far longer than it should have. She should have ended it years ago. Siobhan had known then that Oscar wanted more than she would ever be willing to give. Yet she had tried. Maybe not with her whole heart, but she had given it a shot. That's what lonely people did. Those who wanted to love and be loved. The problem was, she kept doing that with the wrong men. Anger flashed in Oscar's eyes as his face contorted with disgust.
"You're going to regret this. You'll come back to me within a month. Be prepared to do a lot of begging. I'm a prime catch. Literally hundreds of fey women out there would do anything to have me."
"I hope you find the one for you," she said, and turned to leave. Oscar's hand wrapped around her arm. She paused and looked down at it before lifting her gaze to his face.
"Release me. Now. Don't go."
Was that a note of fear she heard in his voice? His fury was gone, but she didn't trust the tinge of panic he wore now.
"This is for the best. Siobhan, please. I need you to stay.
She frowned when he trailed off.
"They what?" "Nothing."
He shook his head and glanced away.
"Just stay. I'll be whatever you need me to be."
He was lying. Of that she was positive. He must be speaking of his family. They had been after Oscar and Siobhan to get married for some time. She had been the one to put them off with one excuse after another. Her family was quite happy they hadn't gotten married, since they hadn't been too keen on Oscar to begin with. Siobhan gently pulled her arm from his grip.
"Goodbye, Oscar."
Instead of walking out the door, she teleported away so he wouldn't try to grab her again. She jumped to 2 more locations before she was able to take an easy breath. Even then, she looked around to make sure that he hadn't somehow followed her. She had never seen such a look of desperation in his eyes. Surely he couldn't be that upset about her not attending the event with him that evening. She wasn't even sure what it was. He hadn't told her much, other than it was a special privilege to be asked. When he refused to divulge more, she had been instantly on guard and wary of attending. Siobhan didn't like secrets or surprises. That was one reason she had ended things this morning. Her cowardice had kept her from doing it sooner. Maybe because she knew what it was to be hurt in a situation like that. It might have been many, many years since she'd had her heart broken, but the scars were still there. Same as the heartache. Her father kept telling her that until she let go of the past and the one who'd gotten away, she would never find happiness with another. She wrinkled her nose as she thought of the string of relationships she had ended since getting hurt. Her father had a point. Siobhan walked the streets of Dublin. She liked getting lost in the crowds. The noise of the city and its occupants was like white noise. It allowed her to contemplate and think. She considered where she would go now. Remaining in Dublin, where she would most likely run into Oscar, might not be the best idea. It had been a while since she had been up north. Perhaps some time on her family's estate before deciding what her next stop would be was in order. She turned to cross the street when something caught her attention out of the corner of her eye. She glanced to the side and caught sight of two fae dressed in all black, standing perfectly still amid the tourists. Siobhan did a double take, but they were gone. They had been there. She was sure of it. Just as she was positive that they had been looking at her. A chill raced down her spine. Was this Oscar's doing? Perhaps she needed to leave Dublin sooner. Siobhan scanned the area once more, waiting for the fae to appear in another place. Dark fae loved to wear all black, but one of the fae had been light. The fact that they had been together and dressed similarly was curious. She hurried across the street when the light flashed for her to go. The longer she walked and didn't see anything, the more she wondered if it had only been her imagination. Every time she thought about ducking out of the mortal's sight and teleporting away, something made her stay. She had no idea why until she realized where she stood. "Trinity College," she said as her steps slowed. She paused in front of the entrance. There wasn't a time she didn't pass by that her thoughts didn't return to the past. She wished she could let it go. The past didn't hurt quite as bad at times, but the pain never truly went away. It was always there, waiting to remind her of how happy she'd once been, of how deeply she had loved, and how shattered she had become when it was over. Siobhan hadn't stepped foot in the college since. She hadn't wanted to. It was odd that something compelled her to walk through the main gates now. Hesitantly, she made her way onto campus. It felt weird to be back. So much had changed, and so much hadn't. She loved the architecture of the older buildings. They were so grand and beautiful to behold. She hadn't attended the college. No, she had simply liked walking the grounds and buildings. Something about them made her smile. The humans might not have magic, but they could create stunning works of art in their structures. As she strolled through the grounds, she found herself smiling again. Some students hurried from one place to another, while others stood talking in small groups. The deeper she went, the more she realized that she had missed out on so much beauty because she feared for her heart. Feared the memories being back on the grounds would dredge up. And she was right to worry. Returning to campus stirred up everything. No, that wasn't entirely true. She had been thinking about the past, of how her life could have gone, for some time now. It was like it had a hold on her and refused to let go. Or was she the one who wouldn't loosen her grip? Siobhan turned with the path, seeing the museum ahead and then the rose garden. She wanted to turn away from it, but she couldn't. Once, so very long ago, she'd had a magical night in the garden with the love of her life. "Ruach," she whispered, as her eyes swam with tears. She blinked them away, but she didn't shy away from the memories. Instead, she embraced them, savoring every second that replayed in her mind. She'd discovered true happiness that night. She had known then that he was the one for her. No matter how hard she tried to stay in that memory, it slipped away. It would be easy to remain in the past and replay the memories on repeat. It was more tempting than she would ever admit. Siobhan sighed as her gaze skirted away. She jerked her head back. Her heart skipped a beat when she saw a man sitting on a bench. Chills raced over her skin, and she couldn't draw breath into her lungs. She knew how he held himself, the tilt of his head. Even across the distance, she knew it was Ruach. For an instant, she almost called out to him, but she stopped herself. The last time she had seen him, he'd torn her heart to shreds and left her standing in the rain. Her pleas and tears hadn't cracked his hardened shell. Her hands were clammy, her heart racing now. Once, she had searched every face for his, hoping to encounter him. After a while, she became thankful that never happened. It was strange to see him now. He was a part of her life that she had desperately tried to let go of, but never quite managed. Her sisters repeatedly told her it was because she was still in love with him. Eileen, her eldest sister, even mentioned trying to find him. Siobhan had nixed that idea quickly. If he didn't want her, then she wouldn't chase after him. She couldn't take her eyes from him now. He sat forward, a frown on his face as if he were troubled. Despite how badly he had wounded her, she wanted to comfort him. Mostly, she wanted to be near him, to see his pale silver eyes and hear his deep voice. Siobhan knew nothing of his life now. She'd done that on purpose. She didn't want to know if he was with someone, though she was sure he was. A man like Ruach never stayed single for long. He had so many good qualities, despite his questionable family. Now, she understood what had drawn her to Trinity College. The longer she stared at him, the harder it was to walk away. It didn't matter how much time had passed since they had last spoken, she couldn't chance an encounter. She didn't trust herself. Ruach had believed in her when others hadn't. He had shown her how to go after what she wanted. He'd been her cheerleader, just as she had been his. Their relationship had been as perfect as one could be. Then it all fell apart. She still didn't know the reason. It was the one thing that had haunted her all these years. She wanted closure. Well, she'd once wanted it. Would it do any good to know now? Did it really matter why he had ended their liaison? "Yes," she said aloud. It mattered. If she could get the answer, then she might finally be able to close the door on Ruach and get on with her life as she should have done long ago. Siobhan squared her shoulders and lifted her chin before starting toward Ruach. She hadn't gone 2 steps before he suddenly rose and hurried away without looking in her direction. Her lips parted to say his name, but she didn't want to chance that he might ignore her. She had wanted to surprise him. Now, her chance was gone. She ran to catch up with him, but she couldn't find him. Siobhan stopped and threw up her hands in frustration. She sighed and turned around, her gaze catching on two fae in solid black.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?